This is the Propcast, and I'm Louisa Dickins. Before we introduce our guest, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Leon Cantor from Future Place, organisers of the largest tech and innovation event for real estate in Australasia, the Real Estate Innovation Festival, taking place from 9th to 10th of November in Sydney. For more information, please visit realestateinnovationfestival.com.
Today on the Propcast, we will find out what makes a smart, sustainable technology. And today's guests are Becca Rushin, the Director of ESG at Jamestown, and Sonu Panda, the CEO of Prescriptive Data. So welcome to the show, Becca and Sonu.
Thanks, Lou. I really appreciate you inviting me today and look forward to chatting.
Lou, thanks for having me as well. But I have to tell you, I feel like I'm getting the better end of the stick here in the sense that, I'm like LMRE is everywhere. And to have an opportunity to chat to the proper mastermind behind it, it's like I'm meeting a celebrity.
Oh my God, I love this podcast. This is the best one of the show. Look, it's a pleasure to have you both on here. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with our audience your career journeys to ESG and technology. Before we hopped on, everyone, we were talking about how, I guess, there's not so much communication between both sides of the business on the ESG side, technology side. So how they come together, this is what we're going to be talking about. Now, Sonu will obviously explain more about Prescriptive Data and how it improves sustainability of buildings to improve, obviously it helps our environment as well as the tenant's comfort. But what does it actually really do? Where's the real value add? Now, Becca will talk us through Jamestown's sustainability and social responsibility initiatives. And for those who don't know about Jamestown's Green Program and Charitable Foundation, Becca will be sharing more information on that too. But also, we're going to be hearing some examples of what tech pilots Jamestown are doing and trialing in their portfolio, which those who are listening in from APAC or Europe, this company is a pretty international company. You're obviously in Boston, Amsterdam, Atlanta, and so forth. They have, I think, the amount of assets under management, and this is since June this year, is $13.1 billion. So that's quite a large portfolio. Becca and Sonu have been in this space for some time. Now they're going to be sharing the advances they've both seen and the challenges ahead when it comes down to net zero. So let's start the show. Becca, why don't you start us off? How did you get to obviously being within the ESG space at Jamestown? And then I'd love to hear also how you both know each other.
Yeah, I'll start with kind of the short version of my story. I was really lucky to learn about sustainability during my undergraduate studies. I was focused on environmental policy, but read the book Cradle to Cradle, as well as The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. And I was really hooked on these big ideas like natural capitalism and biomimicry. And I was inspired by the fact that these solutions really seemed simple, and they seemed to kind of break that traditional thought that in order to do the right thing, it was always going to cost you money and couldn't potentially be good for business. And so I was really, really inspired by that. I decided to go to the Netherlands to study sustainable development. And that really helped me get more of a global perspective. From there, it was the recession. So I went to work for a local government that had a sustainability commission, which was really useful for kind of understanding how local governments work. And still today, it's taught me a lot about how things happen at the local level, which has a really big impact on our buildings. And when I found Jamestown, Jamestown had really just started a formal sustainability program a couple of years prior. And I was their first full-time sustainability hire. So at the time, there was a lot of focus on sustainable development and new construction, but not as much of a focus on standing assets. And over the last 10 years, I've been focused a lot on putting systems in place. And that's kind of evolved from, benchmarking of monthly utility performance to, I would say, more robust energy management platforms. I actually first heard about Prescriptive Data through a friend that used to work at the Department of Energy and then went to work for Prescriptive Data. And then I think eventually Sonu and I sat on a panel, or maybe Sonu moderated the panel. And I got to hear, John Gilbert from Rudin and then Prescriptive Data talk about the evolution of the Nantum platform. It's a really crowded space, the kind of prop tech space, as most of the folks listening probably know. We're getting hit up by vendors all the time. I get multiple emails a day of folks trying to sell me energy management solutions to help me save the world. But I feel like, when smart people that I know are getting behind something and dedicating their time and careers to get behind a technology and just, having that face time and getting to know the team and understand the product, I think that's really helped kind of translate into the pilots that we're currently doing with prescriptive data. And we've had a little bit of fun along the way.
Love that. You mentioned about this market becoming more saturated. I don't know what the latest update in stats. I can imagine it's around 16,000 in the world or something, which I guess compared to other industries, that doesn't sound that much, but it does in, I guess, this sort of stage development. Now, Sonu, you've had Fan on the show. How did you obviously become DO of Script Data? It would be really helpful to share with us a little bit more about the product, who's using it, how does it help with cost savings, how does it enhance thermal comfort? It's OT, it's IT. What's the difference? Tell us all.
Lou, I have to admit, with that prompt, I'm not even sure where to start. I mean,
No,
what you just prompted me to talk about, I think I could talk about for days. But I have to say, before I get started, let's just be very clear that I'm delighted to be on the podcast, but in particular, I'm delighted to be in Becca's orbit. And not only because she is great fun, and we're really delighted to be able to collaborate with her, but so much of what we do is a function of the deep thoughts that our customers have and the feedback that we receive. That this is not a situation where we simply build something in a cave and it happens to click. It's the kind of thing where we try and have conversations with smart and switched on people like Becca. We try and understand their challenges, and then we go back to the office and try and turn that into really compelling technology. So let's be clear. We're here because people like Becca are pushing the envelope. And so, Becca, great to have you on the podcast and to be on the podcast with you. So to come back to your question, Lou, maybe I'll just give a little bit of context on me. I've always been in the enterprise software business. I either joined companies that were small and then became big, or I started something small that became of a good enough size that we were able to sell those businesses and move on to the next thing, which is sort of how I started thinking about all things climate tech, all things sustainability. About 6 years ago, I guess it was early 2016, my co-founder and I had sold our last company to a private equity firm. My son was 8 days old when we had started that company, so I spent a whole heck of a lot of time playing video games with him as soon as I had nothing to do. And then my wife made me join a new mom's boot camp in Central Park so I could shed some weight. And as I was doing all of those things, I started thinking about how can I work in a field that is fundamentally important to the world at large and in which I can have impact, which is what led me to meeting a really wonderful family, the Rudin family here in New York City. They're one of the 6 dynastic real estate families of New York. They're absolutely lovely people. They're technology oriented and they are innovation oriented. And what I discovered in the course of some dialogue with them is that they had a bunch of interesting internal initiatives that were producing some really remarkable results for them. Everything from saving them upwards of nearly $5.5 million a year across their 10 million square feet of commercial space in terms of energy costs. And then a almost startling figure, which is that in so doing and in concert with that, they'd reduce their carbon footprint by 44%.
Wow.
And so as I dug deeper into that initial kernel of a great idea, it became very evident to me that they had the beginnings of a true building operating system that could be impactful across a number of different operational disciplines within a building, but was led by something that is somewhat unusual, and that is a hard dollar return on investment and a quick payback story that even for real estate types that aren't so given to be enthralled with ESG initiatives or believe in climate change was a economic sort of driver for adoption of our technology. And I thought to myself, if we can make money while doing significant good and do it at scale, then that would be a really great way to spend my time.
Agree to that. Yes, yes, yes. Can we also go back to, did you say 44%?
Yeah, exactly right. So early days, and maybe I should sort of provide a little bit more context. So Prescriptive Data as a business started as a project within the Rudin management portfolio here in New York City. And to be fair, it's such an incredibly unfair advantage to be able to dream up ideas in collaboration with their operation team, to test them and prototype them within a real live operating environment, And then only when it's been proven to be effective do we then offer it to the rest of our customers. We're now a completely separate and distinct business from route and management, completely externalized, our own offices, our own operations, and the whole bit. But so much of this, yeah, exactly, growing up and becoming independent. But so much of what we do can be traced back to those very earliest days. And so the very original premise was this idea that commercial office exists to provide productive and comfortable workplaces for those that are tenants. And a big part of that is ensuring indoor air quality that is good, and also ensuring thermal comfort, which is not too hot, not too cold, just right, and on a consistent level as people go about the nature of their work, depending on the type of tenant they are. And the challenge at the time was to say how to do that in the most efficient way possible. And so one of the key themes there was, why are we cooling spaces when nobody's in them? Why are we heating spaces when there's nobody in them? Let's take a couple of off-the-shelf technologies, this idea of a general purpose and flexible IoT platform meets IoT devices, in this particular case, occupancy sensors, to understand the rhythm by which people come in and out of the building, and then correlate that with the fan speed and the HVAC infrastructure, such that spaces are only being, held in a tight, thermal band when they're being used, when they're being occupied, and as people go about their daily work. And so that required a whole, sort of a simple notion, but required the build out of a considerable amount of infrastructure that enables us to connect to existing building operational technology, that enables us to connect to third-party IoT sensors like occupancy sensors, and to then create a brain that can learn the rhythms of the building, and then based on its observations of negative patterns, like intercept them and dampen them, and when it sees positive patterns, repeat them and amplify them. And that was the very genesis of what has now become the Nantum building operating system.
Amazing. Well, look, if it's good enough for Eden, it's good enough for Jamestown. It should be good enough to have some other real estate players out there. And for those listening in, I think Prescriptive is across sort of 10 million square feet of real estate that use your software. So that's awesome, by the way. Now, going back to you, Becca, obviously your role as, I think, Director of ESG at Jamestown, you lead sustainability and corporate social responsibility initiatives. And there's obviously your green program, and you also have a charitable foundation. And for those who aren't familiar with what corporate social responsibility is, an example initiative, and what your green program and your charitable foundation does, can you please share a bit more about this? Because these initiatives, I'm sure, might be utilized in other businesses as well. But you mentioned earlier you were building your team. Lots of people have only just signed off this budget or only just hiring their heads of ESG as early stages for this world for real estate. So talk us through, I guess this ties into what your strategy is and what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I would say most simply that both of the programs, the Jamestown Green Program and the Jamestown Charitable Foundation, are ultimately about our efforts to reduce Jamestown's impact on the environment and support the communities where we own property and where we operate. I will start with the Charitable Foundation just because I think that's a little more simple. The Charitable Foundation was really established to help host community events that benefit nonprofits. So, we invest in properties in metropolitan centers like New York, and then the foundation supports nonprofits that make those cities more desirable places to work. And so one example is in New York, we host Sunday Supper each spring, which is a benefit for the James Beard Foundation. And the foundation supports 5 focus areas. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainable and local food movements, parks and green space, alternative transportation and transit, and design. So we work within each of our regions to support nonprofits that are doing great work in those spaces. The Jamestown Green Program is really our proprietary program for sustainability efforts, and that spans, the property level, the portfolio level, and the corporate level. So we basically, we look to find management practices and initiatives that help increase our net operating income and drive financial performance at our asset, and also make our assets more valuable, right? Because we believe, especially now more than ever, that we'll see kind of a flight to quality in today's environment. And we want our assets, well positioned. So, I'm happy to kind of go into more detail, but that's kind of the overview of both of those programs. And, one thing that I think is really important about our portfolio that makes it both challenging, but also I think really kind of increases the success stories when we have them, is that our portfolio is very diverse. We don't own commodity, glass office towers. We've got a lot of special snowflakes. And I like to poke fun at real estate owners that we always think our buildings are super complicated. We own a lot of old buildings. We own a lot of buildings that are in kind of multiple stages of modernization and upgrades. And so that really does present some interesting challenges when it comes to energy management.
No, I bet. I think at the moment, this is non-stop in the UK, what we're talking about. We have so many, obviously, these beautiful buildings, owned by like the estates, and like, oh my God, how can we make these greener? What are we going to do with these?
And it's always
boilers out.
Yeah, the old boilers. I saw an article where it basically was saying that so many of our buildings are going through a midlife crisis. And I couldn't help but laugh because, we see it play out in real time. And one thing that I also am kind of reminding my colleagues is that it's not always the larger assets that are the most challenging. In my experience, it's often the, small to medium-sized buildings that can be the most difficult to kind of wrap our arms around.
Yeah, no, agreed. And what about, so you're obviously prescriptive data, big fans of this technology, and those listening, I'm sure people are going to go sort of check it out. Are there any other ESG focused companies you're sort of piloting on the portfolio that are helping to reduce emissions, more specific to ESG?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sonu's heard me say this a bunch. I think the holy grail for a tech company, and frankly, even for someone in my seat, is to find some sort of, portfolio deployment that works for every single asset, right? Like everyone wants that package deal. Maybe one day my opinion will change on this. But, I think because of the nuances of our buildings, I've been focused a lot on, first just having a system in place. And now over the last couple of years, we've been focused more of like the quality of the platform and matching specific tech solutions and providers with a specific type of asset. For example, prescriptive data, we're piloting at 2 buildings in San Francisco currently. And so we're using their artificial intelligence to help reduce operating expenses. And just during that rollout, we've learned a ton about our building by having that kind of layer of transparency. Frankly, it's helped us understand, how big of a challenge that building operator has had on their hands over the number of years that they've been at that site. Another company that we've partnered with is called Carbon Lighthouse.
Yeah.
So they have a little bit different approach. They use an AI platform to basically do kind of a digital energy audit. So they identify energy saving projects that the team then implements. And basically they help kind of back up those savings projections with their energy models that they do. And then they monitor those projects to make sure that they stay in place over the long term.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. You mentioned you obviously studied in Northern Europe, where there is, I guess, when it comes down to technologies like climate tech, it's, I guess, slightly more advanced than it. But obviously in the US, there's a lot more sort of larger ticket size, big investments going more in technology coming out of it. So I'm super excited to hear about other technologies that are working. I think everyone's heard about Measurable and Deeply, but you mentioned obviously Carbon Lighthouse and a few others. So the more that come, hopefully the more change and ability for us to get closer to the net zero. Whilst we're on the topic of net zero, now you've obviously both been in the space for longer than a lot of our listeners as well. And Sonu, I'd love to bring you back in as obviously being directly involved and on the technology side. What's sort of the main challenge you face in the industry? Obviously, you had great reading brought into your product. You've got some brilliant clients, but what's the kickback that you get? Is that people have to be buying into the fact that we need technology to hit net zero? Is adoption going to slow down due to geopolitical issues? I don't know. Is it recession looming? Are people feeling that because there's not too much regulation enforced now, they can probably still get away with it? I don't know. What have you seen?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think in general, of course, everyone, myself included, I think everybody's worried about the geopolitical stuff, and it's almost inconceivable that all of the stuff that we're referring to is actually happening. But it's so sort of intergalactic. I have to admit that I try not to spend much time thinking about it. And that's largely because there is so much momentum around sustainability, regular for lots of different reasons. Everything from a much, much more recently matured and ongoingly maturing regulatory environment around the importance of addressing climate risk, understanding baseline, taking action towards relative carbon efficiency, that I don't necessarily see a slowdown per se on the horizon. I see quite the opposite. I see a more widespread recognition that climate change is real, that achieving carbon neutrality through offsets is not enough, and that true science-based approaches to suppressing energy consumption, to suppressing carbon footprint is what's called for. And the pace at which people have gone from saying, hey, I think we're at job done using offsets and achieving carbon neutrality, to them saying that's not good enough, we need to solve for a plan towards carbon net zero. Like, I think that transition, I literally feel as if I witnessed it happen in front of me, over the span of the last 6 months or so. So I'm excited. I think that the opportunity is just absolutely massive because people recognize that they need to do something.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of noise. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be noise. But, I think particularly for real estate, even more so than, kind of debt and infrastructure, other verticals, a lot of the things that fall under the ESG umbrella, it's ultimately just good management or good diligence, right? Like, no, it's playing with a full deck and knowing all of the key information, right? Like, if the concept of ESG didn't exist, I don't think many owners or investors are going to tell you that they don't want to know the flood risk of their property, or they don't want to know their exposure to an energy transition, a clean energy transition, whether or not they support it, right? It's ultimately about risk identification and kind of shifting risks into opportunities where you can. And I know earlier I chatted a little bit about, how my roots in local government. And I think, despite what's happening at the national level, I think, what's happening at the local levels is really, really rapidly moving. It started with benchmarking. Now there's energy and carbon standards in a lot of our municipalities. And at the end of the day, our tenants, our investors, our lenders, even our talent and our employee pipeline, they all care and value this. And so, we really do see it as part of our fiduciary responsibility.
Agreed. You mentioned about employee values. It's talking about this, lots of hiring across investment managers, consultancies, tech companies. It's a new EVP, which is employee value proposition for those listening in and those looking to hire. It's like, what do the Gen Zs and millennials sort of look for? It's like, lots of them want to work for impact companies. They want to work something for, like, you mentioned about a healthy building, a healthy environment. These are the things people are actually paying attention to, which, I'm going to be honest, I don't think my parents ever thought about. And not only sort of just clocking on, I think Mum just learned how to recycle the other day. But baby steps, right?
We've come to the LMRE part now. But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
With inflation at its highest since 1982, we want to make sure that both our clients and candidates are prepared for a shift in the prop tech market. A huge advantage of our consultants being 360-degree prop tech recruiters means that we can communicate regularly on both sides of the business. Our job is to make both the hiring process easier for clients and the job searching process easier for candidates. In short, a recession can be intimidating, unpredictable, and tumultuous. But it doesn't need to be. We at LMRE are here to help. Head to our website, lmre.tech, and we can find the right talent for your company's needs.
Guys, we've come, unfortunately, to the final part of it, and I'm going to break it up because I'm conscious of time. So it's the LMRE part. Sonu obviously answered the E part when he said what he's most excited about. But the L part, Sonu, can you share with us, what's one of the main lessons you've learned throughout your career? You've obviously sold a company, started one. Any tips for the audience listening in?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer the question directly, and then I'll sort of relate it to what's happening in the climate tech space. A long time ago, a colleague of mine and a co-founder of mine came across this article that was written by a guy named Paul Johnson, who at the time was a regular columnist for Forbes magazine. And you can look this particular article up. It's entitled The Rhino Principle, rhino meaning RHINO as in the animal. And the premise of the blog post is basically, or the article, was just basically this notion that rhinos as animals are in many ways evolutionarily almost obsolete, in the sense that they're not as fast as cheetahs, they're not as tall as giraffes, all the kinds of things when you think about the savannah and how to survive on the savannah, they're not well equipped for, but that they are equipped with one particular capability. And that is the ability to choose an objective and then charge relentlessly and unfailingly with extreme focus. And so Paul Johnson in that article talks about how when he gets writer's block, he chooses to just simply commit to rhinoing through the task at hand. And then in the article, he also talks about how useful this principle is in the business world. And so as we think about the ebbs and flows of regulatory environment and priorities and new technologies, on the scene and old technologies becoming obsolete, I think there's an element of the Rhino principle that has been just remarkably helpful for all of us here at Prescriptive Data. And that is this idea of keeping our eye on the prize, that there is impact to be made, and that regardless of the ebbs and flows and the geopolitical climate, that we have to recognize that we're doing really, really important work and that we must stay focused on it. And so I guess in summary, I offer that to the folks that are listening to the podcast. It's been a massive help to me in life to just observe the Rhino principle.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Right, Becca, is there anyone you want to give a shout out to, a product or service other than the Prescriptive Data team?
Oh gosh. I would say like one of the main things that people will tell you about me is that I love connecting people. And I think part of the reason that I've been successful is just because I've, been relentless about kind of networking and finding partnerships and, operating really for the last 5 years as kind of a one-person internal department. I've kind of become very resourceful. And so I would say, all of the folks working in this space, I owe credit to all the other owners that I compare notes with, all the software providers that are that answer my phone calls at odd hours and are willing to just have very frank conversations, because this work really is challenging. On one hand, we have these big global goals, right? Like we have a net zero 2050 carbon target. We've adopted all 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those commitments are very motivating to people. They like to see that we've made progress and we hit our 20% reduction that we were targeting for 2024 a couple of years early. It's like you're definitely building the ship while you're sailing it in this space. And, one of my peers, Ben Myers from Boston Properties, we were on a panel recently and we were talking about low-hanging fruit and how on one hand, a lot of the building stock currently was built really inefficiently. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. But Ben said, the thing about low-hanging fruit is that it grows back. And he's right. And so it's like this mix of, we've done the easy stuff. We're at a point where it's getting harder to make, meaningful progress. It's no longer just, changing a light bulb. At this point, we're really talking about, change management and, really thinking about how we operate and run our buildings. And buildings are alive. My dad used to tell me that when I would get freaked out as a kid because the house was making noise and I would get scared. But I think about it all the time. Weird stuff happens in buildings. And so, I would just say, like, keep it all in perspective, lean in on your friends. Everybody's got war stories. And, if you find us at the right time, we're willing to talk about them. But, it's always going to be kind of ebbs and flows of, successes and challenges. And, sometimes you experience all that in one day, right? But I think that's the beauty of working on a fun, diverse portfolio is that, it's never the same path from asset to asset.
Agreed. Right, we've got the R part. We're going to skip the E part. So the R part's what's been the most rewarding aspect of it. And I feel like from back what you just said, it's about working into the networking, connecting people is massive for you as well. And I love what Ben said about the low hanging fruit as well. It's so, so true. And also this is a quick shout out on my side to the Occupy guys who run their own podcast. They asked me, what is like a standout trait for people who are like super successful and going to go on to sort of do great things. And I said it's people that give time of day and are connectors and do that with people, because this is how everyone starts, business starts flowing a lot more. And I'm sure, Sonu, you will agree with this as well. Like, you wouldn't have met, obviously, the Breeding family unless you've probably been connected that way. It's so important in this industry for everyone to be like that. So I love that. I love that trait from you, Becca. Okay, but enough about me. Last one is what's been the most rewarding part? And this is going to go to Sonu. What's supposed to mean the most rewarding part of working in the prop tech, climate tech space?
Well, at the expense of repetition, I think the fact that we're focused on something that is a shared concern, and if we resolve it is a shared benefit, is something that is obviously very important to me, but is absolutely a driver for people to join us here at Prescriptive Data in our mission. And so I think that's the main thing that comes to mind. I think the other thing, though, is I think there is a lot of analysis paralysis happening in the industry, and to be able to provide people with a step-by-step playbook for how to go from a standing start to achieve carbon net zero, like that dialogue and that exchange is just a really gratifying way to be helpful to the world at large.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And what a lovely way to finish as well. Becca and Sonu, it's been bloody great having you both on the show. I love your perspectives on things. I love also I guess the sort of background of where you guys have come from and what you're working on. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you both after the show. Sadly, we've come to the end. So both, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing you both at some events very, very soon.
Yeah, we'll see you, Lou, at Blueprint. Fingers crossed.
Thanks so much for having us, Lou. That was fun.
Thank you.
Bye, Becca. See you soon.
Talk soon.
Making a high-quality podcast like this one takes a lot of work. That's a fact. But not when you hire a podcast company. With our white glove experience, we handle everything for you. From guest outreach all the way through to publishing and promotion, we handle it all. You show up to hold great interviews and build relationships with your guests, and we take care of everything else. Podcasting is not just about the audience. Every podcast interview is the start of a new relationship. With a weekly podcast, you'd build relationships with 52 ideal partners or prospects through your podcast interviews over the next 12 months. Do you believe that 52 new relationships would help grow your business? We do. Contact Jason at apodcastcompany.com and let's talk.